Hello and welcome to Michael and Ivanka's Grand Podcast. It's a highfalutin podcast. Because we just choose subjects that sound like you don't want to think about them, but it's fine. And you'll enjoy it. My name's Michael Forrest.
My name's Ivanka Magic. Yesterday I did hear somebody telling somebody else about describing our podcast to somebody else and say, well, you look, it's all like philosophy and it's all like really heavy subjects like death and life.
Did you hear someone say that?
Yeah, but they hadn't actually listened to it.
Yeah. That's
so it's just like, I had a look. Because I was in yesterday as a user research coach, and two of the people that I'm coaching asked it. One said, "Oh, what's your podcast about, Ivanka?" And the other one went, "Oh, it's just really heavy subjects like death and life." And basically, he hadn't listened to it, but fair dues.
This is our mission, though, because otherwise, and we know it's annoying to think about this stuff. So that's what we're doing. We're biting the bullet for you. So you just have to kind of absorb our thoughts. Just blindly follow along with our beliefs.
Do what we say.
Do what we think. So think what we think. This week we're talking about responsibility.
Ooh, responsibility to ourselves, to our communities, to our planet, taking responsibility for things.
Our jobs, our families, there's all sorts of responsibilities available. So,
there are many responsibilities available, yes.
So let's, without much longer delay, continue.
Was that you doing a funny?
I was thinking of the waveforms. Like, where am I going to cut this? No.
Keep going.
Shit. All right, let's do it. Before we do anything else, we're just going to do our weekly ramble at the start. How are you, Ivanka? How was your week?
I'm very well. My week was good. I did more work this week than I normally do or have been doing.
Paid work?
Paid work, yes.
Yeah, I mean, you're always working, right?
Yeah, we should distinguish. I was doing more work this week that I can invoice.
Excellent.
Which is always nice. And I really enjoyed it. Went into London twice. Not once, twice.
You didn't say hello once.
No, I didn't. Well, I wasn't going anywhere near you. I just went into Victoria, down the road, back out.
Yeah, I'm not anywhere near anyone.
I enjoyed it. I was doing coaching, training type stuff, which is always quite intensive. You have to be really present and really focused, but that's nice. I did lots of preparing my house for Airbnb because we're going away next weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And
your Brighton house or your other
my
house?
Brighton house, yeah.
Oh wow, you're Airbnb-ing your real home.
Yes, we Airbnb our real home.
Wow.
Our real actual home. And if you're thinking about doing it, do get in touch with me and I'll send you a link because I get money if you decide to do it.
Okay.
It makes you keep your house in order.
Okay.
Frankly, like, all those little DIY jobs that you keep putting off, you have to get done because you've got people coming who are actually going to pay to stay in your house. And it makes us certainly think twice before we buy random things that just are going to clutter up the place.
Right.
So,
are you getting someone to? Are you using a service or anything, or are you just?
No, because we often go away for a number of weeks. I offer a discount on people who want to stay for that period. So they tend to just be one person who is looking for somewhere to live, not be on holiday. So, this is our home, but we've got one room fitted a sturdy lock on, and that's where we put the things we actually care about. But everything else, there's nothing, no
that's good.
Really amazing family heirlooms. And I have to say that we put away the projector and leave people a telly because I couldn't do long distance technical support.
Were you doing that? Were you having to do that?
I ahead of time. I'm really the only one that can
operate our TV.
Operate our TV system. So when we're not here, they have a normal TV that just switches on and off. Michael, how was your week?
My week was good. I seem to be out of the other side of my little depressive phase, which is nice. I think I've sort of figured out what I'm going to try and do to some extent. It's quite small things, But the main thing, I've been editing this video that I shot last week, and do you know what? TV has become weird now. So I showed my brother this sort of live footage I took of this, the Dunning-Underwood Mammoth Beat Organ is the name of this project. I shot it live at this festival, and I sort of showed it to my brother, the sort of first draft edit. And he was like, kept going on about the framing being bad, like made me watch this rule of thirds thing. I was like, whatever. Like, I was like, okay, I get it. My framing's not great. But I watched this thing and I was like, okay, rule of thirds. So then I'm sort of shooting all of this stuff, like trying to keep the kind of rule of thirds line. So you divide the, sort of 3 vertical lines, and then you can sort of have, 3 horizontal lines as well, and just kind of putting things on the intersections. And I was sort of focusing on that. And now, anytime I watch anything on TV, all I can see is how they've done the framing, and it's doing my head in because I want to stop seeing it because I'm like dreaming about it now. And I'm walking around, I'm like, my head is a camera, and I don't, because this happened to me with music. I kind of learned how to make it, and then it ruined a lot of it for me. And now I'm in danger of ruining sort of, photography for myself because I'm just focused on this bloody technical stuff. But yeah, I finished that. I finished the first draft of the edit. We were going to get someone in to do the voiceover, but then I thought, well, I'm a podcaster. I could do the voiceover. So I had to go
you're
at
a
that.
podcaster.
I had to go at that, and I think it sounds quite good. And then they seemed to like it, so that was a win. And also yesterday, just seeing Dom and Jason enjoying our podcast on Twitter was nice as well. So, I've got a bit of clarity, bit of positive reinforcement on some projects I've been doing. So, let's do it. Let's just sort of excited about where this video goes. And
very good.
And then I've nearly finished my app as well, my new app, Just Calories, which is an app for just kind of consistently counting how many calories you've consumed today and whether they're good or bad or all right. So I'm going to release that hopefully next week. It's just about done.
Nice.
So yeah, ready.
What you were saying about not being able to watch telly after learning about framing and stuff, it's like I was talking to somebody in the week, there's like, since they've started doing usability testing, user research, the thing that they've embraced is whenever they can't do something on some app or some technology, it's now no longer their fault. It's the app's fault. What idiot designed this? Which I think is, I mean, that's a positive change.
Yes.
It's not always just purely annoying. It's funny the more you understand what's going on. But
in it.
Doesn't always make it nice.
Yeah.
But
should we talk about responsibility?
Let's.
Have you got a lot of responsibilities? You've got more than me, haven't you?
I do. I have a child. I have a daughter. I have a dog.
A child, a daughter, and a dog.
A husband. I have.
Husband.
I'm not sure if I'm responsible for him. Since we had our daughter, we did things like make a will, which I'd never done previously. When it was just the two of us, it was like, meh. We'll just have to deal with whatever fallout there is if something happens to one or both of us. But once we had a child, it was like, well, we should do these things. Because my parents never debated these things, and so there was no plan for if one parent died suddenly. So it was all a bit reactive. We've done things like chosen who gets to keep the child if something happens to both of us. It's all very morbid, but
Yikes.
But necessary.
Planning for the worst.
Planning for the worst that you hope never happens and probably won't. But so I have those kinds of responsibilities. I think I also have responsibilities within my family, wider family, like checking in with everyone, helping them out, make sure they're okay. I'm maybe not answerable or responsible for their happiness, but I'd like to know they're okay. Literally, I am responsible for my daughter, but responsible also makes it sound like some sort of a burden, which I don't see.
So is responsibility, is it a burdensome thing? I guess it's always like it means, making a bit of effort, doesn't it? Like if an irresponsible person is sort of synonymous with lazy.
That's true. So,
I don't know what responsibilities I have. I just not to do anything ridiculously stupid, and make sure I lock doors. My family, I don't know, like with my family, there's sort of too many of them to really, because I think I used to, well, my grandma told me years ago, like she thought I took too much responsibility for my siblings, which I didn't really, I still don't quite understand, because I just always thought I, kind of ruled them, but I guess I was quite protective of them as well.
In charge.
I suppose, like, when there was unreasonable kind of stuff coming from above, I would try and, would I? I don't know. It's all from a child's perspective. It's hard to know, now.
What was real?
I don't really know what was happening. But according to my grandma, I took responsibility for my siblings. But now, obviously it's like there's too many. Yeah, I'm the eldest of a family of, 7 children.
Moving on to the next levels of responsibility, there are the whole delivering on your promises.
Yes.
Like at work especially, doing what you say you're going to do. There's also taking...
Or saying you're going to do something seems to be a challenge for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because that requires you going, right, okay, that's what I'm going to do. And some people just like to let everything stay vague and just, we'll have another meeting and no one ever quite... So I think I get a lot done partly because I am pretty unsqueamish about taking responsibility for stuff. Probably at a certain point I end up taking responsibility for too much for whatever reason, but I'm just like, well, this other person isn't taking responsibility for their end, so if it's going to get done, someone's got to do it,
I think that's the balance. That's that taking responsibility for the things you should take responsibility for. Maybe in a work environment, you kind of need to punch up a little bit if you want to progress or you want to have more responsibilities or whatever. But equally, you can't be responsible for things you can't control or can't change. It's very hard.
I have a real problem saying that something didn't get done, like blaming someone else for something not getting done. Like, especially if I think there was a way I could conceivably maybe have kind of done it for them or just kind of worked around that. I have a real problem kind of just sort of like not just like blaming someone else or blaming the circumstances. I just think, like, if you say you're going to do something, you got to do it, even if there's always a way. I kind of feel, and I don't know what it takes for me to go, well, I couldn't do it because this wasn't ready, or I couldn't do it because X, Y. And if I see that happening, straight away I'm kind of like, look, this is, I kind of start warning people about it as soon as I possibly can think about it, because there's nothing worse to me than,
Well, I used to hate that phrase, I'm that you get in Agile, which is like, I'm blocked. And you've been blocked, so unable to proceed for how long? And you haven't come to talk to me about it, or you haven't asked, or what action have you taken to move from being stationary? Nothing. Well, that's just ridiculous. That used to wind me up enormously. We're blocked on design.
What were you doing then while you were blocked? Were you just sitting there? Like, I just can't. Anyway, I think I don't have a problem with it if it's, if you're having a daily stand-up and, it comes up in the morning, but if you're sort of not checking in every day and then someone's claiming blocked a week later, that's just obviously completely unacceptable.
Luckily, we often work in teams where people do take responsibility for their jobs. Because sometimes I'm like, look, if everyone just came in every day and did their job to the very best of their abilities, life would be so much easier. Things happen that you cannot anticipate or can't do anything about, or can't control. And yesterday we had a finding, which was in this. I was helping them analyse this user research, and one of the findings was to do with performance, but in no way was it within the control of any of the people in the team, any of the immediate product people, to do anything about this. But I was like, we have to make sure that we write this down in a digestible way for the people up the ladder to understand that they have truly been told that this is a big risk to the project.
So performance being like sort of speed of
something.
Like software.
So it's like, somebody higher up needs to take 2 people and get them to sort something out. We can't do that. But we can express this risk in a way that might prompt somebody to action.
Right,
because You know, it's like we could kind of go, yeah, well, there's this thing we can't do anything about. Or we can go, if you don't fix this thing, then the whole thing will go wrong. And so I think you do have a responsibility to shout when you know something is a risk or something's going wrong.
Yeah. I had a moment yesterday. I was walking through Hammersmith, and suddenly this guy on a motorbike just kind of came off his bike right in front of me. There was a sort of like bus stop in between, and so I was walking up there thinking, okay, is this going to be me? Am I going to be the one like calling an ambulance and stuff now? And then I sort of got closer, and then there was a couple of workers and a guy that was like, oh yeah, sort of helping him up and kind of dealing with, you know. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I don't have to help this time. I don't know who's riding him. He was fine. It didn't even have particularly bad. It was a bit scuffed, but he was wearing like flip flops and like a t-shirt, and I was like, well, that's no way.
That is irresponsible.
There's no way to ride it. Well, but it was a bit of a moment of, okay, right, what do I have to do? Sometimes it's hard to take responsibility for something because you don't really know what to do.
There is that. But I mean, there is a famous experiment, or it's famously reported. I'll find the reference to it. But basically, there's a serial killer in a city and a woman is being murdered and she's screaming for help and repeatedly, and everybody in the neighbourhood that heard her thought somebody else was calling an ambulance. Yeah. And nobody called the police, nobody called an ambulance, and she was murdered by the serial killer despite doing what everyone told, just calling for help. And that has, I don't know if that phenomenon, I can't remember if it's to do with responsibility or what it is when there's a group, like in your situation, it's like, is it going to be me who calls the ambulance? Is actually one step more responsible and proactive than somebody will call an ambulance.
Yeah, but there is that thing of, when there is someone that looks, you know, there might be someone homeless kind of sitting in somewhere and you sort of walk past them, but then there's this thing, as soon as one person kind of goes to help someone, then other people get involved. Yeah. So there's that sort of permission aspect of it. But I suppose is that because there's a spreading of responsibility, or is it just... But yeah, it's funny because, you know, if I'd not seen the actual accident happen and there was just someone on the floor... I don't know. It's weird, isn't it? If you just don't know. It's in a big city. This is where this happens because when I lived in Brixton, so I used to live in Brixton, the sort of early 2000s, on like right on the high street, right opposite the police station, and it was behind Brixton Academy, with like just the windows were just, you know, they weren't double glazed, so every sound, you know, you couldn't go to bed before 1 a.m, certainly, because it was just like so loud in there. But this Canadian guy moved in. So it was a house share with like 4 of us, and so in the back alley by the academy there was someone sort of screaming, and he sort of straight away called the police, and he was like, oh, there's someone down there and they're screaming, and we were all kind of going, what's this guy doing? It's like every 5 minutes you hear someone screaming or making a lot of noise, or, you know, things going on, and you sort of filter out at a certain point. Which is a sad fact of living in cities, which means that stuff just falls through the cracks, doesn't it? And it's weird to if we didn't have naive outsiders coming through all the time, how many more people would slip through the cracks? I don't know. It's just a theory I've invented right now.
But it makes you think of the normalisation thing that everyone keeps banging on about at the moment, which is like, you know, what is happening is not normal. This is not normal behaviour.
We certainly should not accept this as normal. We shouldn't let this become normal.
But yeah, I mean, I am one of those people that, and perhaps in the past I haven't been, but I've developed actually I'm going to stop and ask.
Well, you said Nick does this, so...
Yeah, Nick does it all the time. It's like makes me feel bad. Come on, man, the film's going to start in a minute. Do we have to go and investigate who's screaming in the park? That happened once.
Really?
Yeah, but I'm more of a... because you literally heard somebody going, help me. So Nick was like, right, where are you? Whatever. And then they were like... 2 friends having a play fight.
Yeah. Oh God.
But it's like I was still...
Well, that's irresponsible of them, isn't it?
It is very highly... I nearly missed my movie because of their behaviour.
Well, I mean, for that, I suppose that undermines... But no, it is irresponsible to kind of like cry wolf.
My veggie box I get delivered weekly comes from Riverford Organics. And for those of you who don't know who they are, the guy called Guy who started Riverford has recently given most of his business away to his workers. So it's now a workers' cooperative, right, or employee owned, or some model like that he's done. I can't remember the specifics, but he does these little newsletters that I don't always read, but I usually cast an eye over them. And I like buying from Riverford. I've bought from Riverford for probably 10 years easily, if not a bit longer. But, they're very mindful. Obviously, it's organic vegetables. You can choose to have no vegetables imported at all. They have some farms in France and Spain as well, which is still... and he talks about the fact that they've done studies with the University of Exeter, I think it is, to say that flight miles travel miles, let's say from Spain or France, are less environmentally impactful than having heated polytunnels in the UK to be able to produce vegetables all year round. They work on waste reduction, so they've got a whole sort of area of their business that looks at how to package vegetables to keep them safe without using plastic and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, but they still use. They do use some plastic, but it's obviously a lot less, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, this week's, he was talking about...
paper to read from it?
I've actually got paper. It's a paper newsletter.
Wow. Okay.
It comes in your veggie box. And I every so often I mean to email them and say, can you not give me this because I don't look at it? Because you get some recipes as well.
Right.
But then I do actually have a look at it, so... And then sometimes go, what the hell is this vegetable? So this week he was talking about the plastic reduction. And then he said, but let's not get distracted by plastic, he said. Anthropogenic climate change is unquestionably the biggest environmental threat our planet faces. We must not allow the plastic debate to detract from this. Reducing plastic does nothing to address climate change. And in some instances, it can make it worse. So he makes this pragmatic policies argument. And he says, the other problem we've got is that for them as a business trying to do plastic reduction is that some things can be recycled, but not every there's no uniformity across the country to say that all councils all recycle this kind of plastic or that kind of packaging. And he said with one of those things, he said, we desperately need an intelligent long-term national policy on what materials will be recycled, composted and incinerated or landfilled. In the current vacuum, effort is being wasted on ill-informed company policies and headline-grabbing claims that will deliver little or no value. He said, to abandon policy to individual choices and market voices is an abdication of responsibility and a failure of government. Time for action, Michael Gove.
Did he write Michael Gove?
Yeah.
Nice.
That's what he said.
But there is this fetish. I do find, like, carrier bags as well. It was like we sort of fetishize a little kind of environmental thing. It is making a little bit of a difference, I suppose. But he's right, isn't it? Like you get obsessed with plastics and then...
I mean, it's like when Michael Gove, they did that, we're going to get rid of plastic straws. Wicked. That is good news, Michael Gove. But you're the government minister for the environment when we're facing a massive climate disaster, and this is your idea of doing something proactive, is it? Banning plastic straws. Yeah, this is all good steps. I don't want you to stop making these steps. But you're the government. You actually have responsibility for these kind of things. Unless we're going to go down the libertarian route, as discussed last week, where we're just going to live in the Mad Max future, where if you're good at fighting, you're going to get the water.
Yeah, so our responsibilities, I think by podcasting, we're taking a little bit more responsibility than we would be for our awareness. But I certainly, the more we talk, feel a shortfall in the responsibility I'm taking for any of the bigger problems. Is that a question of responsibility, or is it a question of activity or consciousness?
Well, I feel like somehow by even recording my opinions on things, I'm having to be more responsible for them, or somehow make them more considered, or question them more.
Which I would call, I guess, accountability. Is that
yeah.
the same sort of thing?
I don't know. They must be in the same family.
Yeah.
It's like where, having a few beers in a pub and going, anyway, that Michael Gove and his plastic straws, and it's, a conversation that's happened and it disappears, and there's no reference to it ever again. There's a difference between doing that and then recording something and actively promoting it.
Yes.
Listen to me. I stand by my thoughts, my opinions. But then I think the thing you and I both struggle with is whether we're doing enough, and whether anything at all. It's like whether this class is doing anything at all, and if it does, is it enough? Does this raise awareness? I suppose responsibility, you do start with yourself.
Yeah.
Don't you? What is the point, Michael? Why do we do it? But I am definitely learning stuff and questioning the things that I do and why I do them, because I'm actively checking in and having a conversation with you. Going, even that? I was thinking about it yesterday. The that Guilty Feminist episode about the ableist language. That's still in my. Jesus. I can't let it go. It's taking ages and ages to filter through my brain to a point where.
Anti-disabled people were you before that podcast?
I don't think I was, but I was just like never, ever, ever stopped and thought about it, or never thought about it in those terms. I never thought calling somebody an M word was somehow, So now so it's just make it. I kind of like things though that make me go, are you right? Really?
Yeah, like if someone can make a case, it hurts.
Yeah.
But that's why it's worth doing. It's just a bit of childbirth, which I know all about. So,
I heard.
Hey, it's a callback. Keep listening, and you'll hear callbacks. I want to talk about crime and also sort of in drugs as well.
Oh,
so you'll
my
hear
goodness.
a lot of people sort of going, "Oh, well, I was drunk. It wasn't my fault," but drugs don't change your personality. They just sort of amplify bits of it. So this idea that you're not responsible for your actions because you're under the influence of something is just, if I hear it, I'm like, nope, absolutely not. Not acceptable. I don't care how messed up you were, because also you have a responsibility not to get that fucked up as well. And a lot of the worst sort of irresponsibility you see is around alcohol, things like that. People just kind of like not really taking responsibility for their behaviour when they're messed up. Have you ever cried drunk?
What do you mean? So I did it because I was drunk?
Something? Yeah.
Big question.
That is a big question, isn't it? I'm sorry. It may not be podcast.
Whoa. I may perhaps. Well, no, I don't think retrospective. No, I have. I've taken no. I know that I've done things because I have been less inhibited, or I don't know what the word, less responsible because I was drunk, but not less responsible for my actions, if you know what I mean. Like, it was me that did it, but it was me that got drunk.
Someone else, yeah.
It wasn't somebody else. I did it. But I perhaps wouldn't have done it if I'd have thought it through a bit harder, if I hadn't been drunk. But I shouldn't have been drunk in that situation. But I think there's certain things that I, as a female person, how drunk I might get at a friend's party at their house where I'm surrounded by people that I love and trust is different to how I might behave if I was out in a nightclub and I needed to get a taxi home and blah, blah. Yeah. So in that way, I've always been fearful of not being in control, which has always led me to, I don't know, retain an element, unless I'm out with somebody who I really like. If I go out with Nick, then he's responsible for me.
Sometimes I'd like to just go, bleh. You deal with
after me.
I'm just going to do whatever I want. I don't care. I'm just going to lie on the floor and I'm just going to go and floppy and you deal with me. Like I have never done that, and I just,
Yeah, I think
Not
I'm
fair.
also a bit too old,
Yeah.
it's not really behaviour that we do. But yeah, I think there's a...
I think I have got that drunk, actually. But yeah, not very many times.
No. I think, I'm not... I didn't. For some reason, I'm surprised to be talking about alcohol in a responsibility, which is just silly. I don't know why I didn't
Please
think of it.
drink responsibly.
Yeah, that's the advert, isn't it?
That's what they have to write on it.
They do, don't they?
But then, we're talking about, doing something embarrassing or, offensive. But crime, it certainly is... Well, not knowing anything about law, I guess my understanding is that if the person who has done something bad takes responsibility for their actions, that the sentence is kind of adjusted accordingly, because the whole point of it is you take responsibility for your actions.
Rehabilitation and taking responsibility. Yeah. So if you take responsibility before you get sentenced, you probably need less of a sentence because you've done the first bit. whereas
there's apparently prison is full of people that innocent people. Prison is full of people that didn't do it, and I'm sure there is enough of that. Yeah, obviously the people that are innocent is a very different thing. But if we sort of confine our commentary to people that did do something and didn't take responsibility for it, there is a reason that you kind of have to lock them up, because they're not gonna...
Well, you certainly need to rehabilitate them in some way, even whether locking them up is the right way or the wrong way, I don't know. But you certainly need to kind of get them to take responsibility. That has got to be the first step.
Is responsibility something that can learning how to take responsibility be part of that rehabilitation then? Is it sort of are we talking about people that don't really know how?
Well, I think if you've not... I don't know where a sense of responsibility... Yeah, I don't know where a sense of responsibility comes from in a person. Is it something you're taught? Is it,
if you have no control, how can you ever be responsible? But of course you're in control of whether you murder someone. So
Well, there's some interesting psychology and stuff around this. If you take, because now that I've certainly done the stats on here, like only something like 3% of the population ever goes into care, but 50% of the prison population has been in care, which means that there's a lot of people in there whose childhoods did not go how they should go. And when I mean should, I mean that they were just cared for. They were by their parents or by people who looked after them. So, many cared for children will have suffered. We've definitely talked about this, all sorts of different kinds of abuse that literally physically prevent certain parts of their brains developing. Now, if that's the situation that those children are in, and they grow up into adults and they're not given the proper care to help them recover from their abuse, then in many ways, I'm not sure that they are responsible. Do you know, I know they're an adult, but if you've grown up to be an adult, I know this is a ridiculous analogy, but, let's say one of your hands was disconnected from you and then it did something. I can't think of a better way. It's like that.
Hand.
You've got an evil hand because the part of your brain that controls that hand didn't develop properly. Like, are you responsible for it? If somebody, you being left to cry and being neglected as a baby prevented part of your brain developing, I don't know.
I mean, this does, I suppose, when you talk about responsibility, you are buying into that sort of the notion of a singular consciousness and self, which isn't necessarily the case. We're an amalgamation of a lot of different behaviours, and it seems like we are an individual, but really we're kind of a lot of different things mashed into one, into a brain and body, and a thing can unexpectedly take over. And are you responsible for the behaviors of the other characters in your dreams?
Wow.
Right? Because if that's how I think of schizophrenia a bit, it's sort of if your dreams happened while you're awake and you couldn't tell the difference, like you're hearing voices, perceiving things that aren't there. It's sort of, to me, it's like, well, we're all crazy at night. It's just then we wake up. And then if something, ostensibly external to us is influencing our behaviour or saying certain things, are we responsible for that? We kind of are. Like, again, former therapist Robert Lewis. I sort of asked him about dream analysis once, and he went, well, I mean, in a dream, every single person in that dream is you. So, what would that then make the dream mean? But do you know what I'm saying? I leapt, since someone criticised us for being philosophical on the podcast, I was like, let's go for it. Let's go for theatre of mind. Let's crank this up a notch. The notion of responsibility implies a singular self, which, philosophically isn't necessarily defensible as it's not necessarily the truth.
On a practical note, I was more thinking, going back, that I'm not responding. I'm more going back to what I wanted to talk about was, I think the thing is that the responsibility, there's community or societal responsibility for people has to come into it. You don't grow up in isolation. You don't exist or learn in isolation. You learn and exist in the society, the community, the world that you live in. So therefore, if somebody in your immediate community is living a terrible childhood, you are partly responsible for that in some way.
Yeah.
Maybe not I think, like if you see a child being, mistreated, if you see, there will be consequences for all of us.
And different societies have different ways of accountability, responsibility. So is it a Buddhist thing where if you take responsibility for the world around you, if you see some litter, even if you didn't drop it, you pick it up and put it in the bin. Whereas I think this is, our sort of individualistic society that we live in, where we kind of have quite tight boundaries on what we feel responsible for versus, a village culture or cultures in other places that allow us not to take responsibility for hungry people in the streets. I think it would be useful to be able to open up that kind of sphere of responsibility a little bit wider than it has been. Like, Good Samaritan. Samaritan's a good Christian story.
Yeah.
He's the enemy, but he helped, and that's.
I've never understood how come so much sort of conservative behaviour is associated with Christianity, when my understanding of Christianity is all about the sort of Good Samaritan, love thy neighbour. I accept that my theological education in the area of Christianity
I can fill in the gaps. It's almost as if they're just taking the tribalistic thing and just saying Christian, non-Christian, and using that just completely out of the spirit of Christianity, using that as a way to divide people up and kind of create us and them groups. Is that what's happening? Or is there something about... Well, and I suppose the Bible being this source of... Because it's kind of an old book now, has all sorts of nonsense in it that doesn't hold up to modern scrutiny. And I will link to there's a good Bible infographic which it's just a kind of diagram of all the contradictions and nonsense in the Bible. Like, if you don't believe, that's just good if you want to just have a play through and see some of the hilarity in there. But if you're gonna start kind of leaning on that for because anything you want you can find in there to justify any behaviour, and then if you have this sort of dogmatic idea, but the whole point of Jesus was it was supposed to change that. It was supposed to kind of loosen the reins of, sort of dogma and that kind of thing. But then it sort of turned back into, I think it's literally just it's us and them. It's Christians and non-Christians. Conservative Christianity is a thing, right?
Yeah,
which is distinct from other kinds of Christianity. So I think it's almost the conservatism is shaping the Christianity, which is maybe a kind of a malleable thing. And then if you're going to be conservative about it, then you're going to be sort of like anti-abortion, anti-gay, all sorts of things, because there is all sorts of stuff in the Bible to kind of support that if you want to look for it. But you're very much cherry picking in that case if you do that. Because
I just think that in that sort of the tribalism bit that you described, there's this absence of critical thinking as well. It's like this acceptance of things that you're being told without going, huh? Or, and isn't it in a way not taking responsibility?
Well,
I do it because Bible.
Yeah, and it's dangerous to have an unquestionable source of knowledge. That's utterly anti-intellectual. That's, you're not willing to learn if you're not willing to question things in one of your sources. If you're going to, it's that in itself, it's a problem.
Yeah, but maybe that's, why I'm not very good at religion.
Yeah.
Like there's a degree of any authority, frankly. But a lot of these modern, Christianity is very sort of touchy-feely, and I'm not meaning like pedo priests or that, obviously. But it is like, what do you think? Even at like Catholic school, when I was like having my first Holy Communion, and even then in the 80s, I'm kind of like, my issue with it was that everyone else was going to be dressed up in a suit, and no one seemed to be. I found that embarrassing, but also no one was going to help me achieve that. So I was embarrassed that I was going to have to do it in just my school uniform, and then I think I don't know, I didn't really feel like anyone was showing me what to do, but they were sort of interpreting it as me having sort of religious doubts, right?
But being sort of very supportive of that, which is sort of weird, like doesn't really go with our idea of sort of dogmatic Catholicism.
No.
But that the reality was it, well, if you're not sure, then let's, it was a kind of a warm reaction to that. It wasn't like, you're a heretic and you will be burned.
I think I owe the lack of religious education in my life to the fact that my father was educated by priests that did you will burn in hell, the eye of God is always looking on you and you will be punished. And he didn't want his children growing up in fear. So he sort of steered us well clear of the Catholic Church, particularly in Herzegovina. And then in England, he was like, okay, you can go. My brother and sister went to Catholic school, but I didn't because it was decided I was too old.
Okay, lucky.
It was too late.
It could be a tangent, but I think responsibility does relate to religion a lot as well. I've said this before. If you feel like you've got someone watching you all the time, then that sort of... It's almost like there's a threat of punishment there that means you have to do the right thing. That if it's merely a responsibility that you don't really... that has to come from it within yourself, that you have no real way of... you don't want to... and there's nothing forcing you, then, what we call taking responsibility now is in a lot of cases what in the past would be enforced by sort of religious fear of like supernatural consequences.
My mother was she was the better enforcer of, not doing what you were told or not doing what you said. And if I didn't want to, if she wasn't watching me, I would still not do the things she didn't let me do. Mm. Do you know what I mean? It's like I didn't...
Well, you have, again, coming back to that idea that we're an amalgamation of different kind of characters in one brain. You'll have had that. Even when she's not in the room, you'll still have had her in your head kind of looking at you.
It's like,
you'll still feel the disapproval.
I remember not doing, I was backpacking in China and not getting on a particular boat or something because I thought, do you know what? If I drown, my mum's going to be really cross. I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. Stupid. Don't do stupid things. Mother will be pissed off. But yeah, so there is that, I suppose. But I think there's one other story on the crime responsibility thing that the moment may have passed, but it's nagging at the back of my brain. But I've always felt very strongly that the age of responsibility is a important thing. Right. I think until you're a formed person, your starting point was if you're taking drugs and alcohol, you are still you. You are just you on something. Yeah. And therefore to say I murdered them because I was drunk, it was still you. But there's a point at which, so one of the reasons I think taking drugs very young is bad is because you're not you yet. You don't know yet. Yeah. I mean, I know we're always evolving, but there is a point where things slow down and stabilise a bit.
And you're not you yet, and also it's going to kind of affect...
It's going to mess... Yeah, it's going to mess you up. It's like, even being... And I definitely drank as a young teenager, but there are many things that you can experiences and feelings you can feel that you can feel with or without, other substances. I mean, nowadays I just have extra coffee. I can be really happy. So I think there's that. And there's also, in the most extreme cases, there are the stories like 2 teenage girls beat an old woman to death. One of the two had basically watched her mother be beaten within an inch of her life, and she herself had been beaten within an inch of her life repeatedly through her life to the age of 14 or 15. She simply didn't understand that beating how could somebody who's been beaten within an inch of their life and been hospitalized multiple times understand that beating somebody could kill them? I've been beaten loads of time, and how could they even have the rational thought in their minds to understand that that's not normal behavior?
Yeah. And a lot of what therapy does for you is helps you untangle what's normal. Well, what's normal and what's just very weird and
unusual and unique and weird to you and your circumstances, or little conclusions you've accidentally drawn.
Yeah.
You hear about people having phobias because they gave the old lady next door a glass of water and then the next day she died and therefore water is dangerous. There's random things that we wire up in our heads that we did. We drew the wrong conclusions when we were little, subconsciously, and then we're stuck with them.
And we can be quite simplistic about how we connect the dots.
Totally. I mean, look at my daughter's growing up and growing down theories at the moment. See example, exhibit A, growing up and growing down. When you're a little girl again, you can borrow my sandals. Oh, thanks. Anyway, but I think in that world of responsibility and crime and punishment, we know about how this child who's been abused their whole life wasn't born to be violent. They were made that way by their circumstances, and as I don't know whether they're all helpable or not, but I don't know that they can take responsibility. And I think that goes for all sorts of things, looking after your health. The thing that's never settled in my mind personally, there's a point at which I look at people and I go all judgy. Yeah. I don't know when it is. I can't say, if they've fulfilled these criteria, I won't judge them, or if they haven't, I will. But there's a point at which I go, well, you're a grown-up now, you must take responsibility for your own actions. But
that's why it's called judgment. Because it isn't quantifiable, and that's why we have to have special people called judges that just judge it.
That's true.
I'm going to say, these bankers, this banking crisis... Did they take responsibility for their actions? They were utterly irresponsible in their behaviour, subprime mortgages, all that, just weird kind of complicated financial conceits in order to kind of get money for things that didn't exist over and over again. And then when the financial collapse happened, like the 2008 one, and they just got away with it, right? And
yes,
did they take responsibility? Did anything happen?
No, they did not.
If we had not just let them off the hook, were there people that would have stepped up and gone, okay, well, my personal fortune is this. Okay, well, could we not have tried to hold them to account a bit more?
Yeah, what I think the whole banking crisis raised is this interesting thing of responsibility and where it lies, because government sort of stepped in and fixed it to some, sort of gave banks money and propped them up and made everything okay, when actually, and it sort of creates this sort of idea that some things, the government can always step in and rescue things, which in the case of climate change, they can't throw some money at the ozone layer and make it, sew it up with dollar notes. So I think there is something about having to take responsibility for stuff and being forced to.
In a way, the financial crisis, it's an easy one to just, it's just money, isn't it? Whereas mental health, we do make our government responsible. They are responsible for the mental health of their citizens to some extent. The idea of our welfare state is to have government take responsibility for people that are struggling. But that's much more complex than, you need that much money. Okay, well, here's that much money, don't do it again, and we sort of own you, but yeah, you're probably,
I mean, the lack of responsibility in that is probably opened the door for some of this Brexit nonsense.
Oh, Brexit. We
do you know what I mean? It's
even talk about the irresponsibility of Mr. David Cameron calling a referendum about something.
Well, if it goes all wrong, the government's going to go and tap up the magic money tree, which isn't a real thing. And, some things can't be unfucked.
Yeah, and then it comes down to punishment, doesn't it? It's like, should we want to see people punished? We want to see people answer to their crimes, and certainly in terms of as far as the financial crisis goes, we've not seen any of that. I'm listening to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History on sort of like it's 5 hours of sort of historical stuff about kind of public executions and punishments and torture and the sort of historical kind of attractiveness of brutality and violence to us that now we sort of accept a sort of fake version of. But just talking about the way the sort of states evolved in terms of what they were comfortable doing as punishment. And that, there was this period of sort of zero tolerance where they wanted a sort of light touch state that didn't do much, but if they did catch you, it was, a hand cut off or, execution for small crimes so that they could have a sort of light touch state. Now we're just, a public hanging, public execution. Maybe not quite what we're asking for, but did we really see anything?
I think the financial sector itself has, done or tried to do stuff to certainly understands how much trust was lost, and so and I can't think of a single example now of things they're doing, but my impression is that they're doing stuff around regulations to be more grown up and responsible. But I don't know, I can't point to anything.
Are they doing it, or are they having it done to them? I suppose.
I think it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other, because I think not everybody in the financial sector is an irresponsible fool. So there are grown-ups in every industry who I don't know enough about it, to be honest. The other thing I heard this week on the news on the subject of taking responsibility for things, or being made to take responsibility for things, was the lawyer representing the women who are accusing Trump of sexual misconduct, and Harvey Weinstein and all these people. Her name is Gloria Allred, and I heard her on Radio 4, and she was brilliant.
Okay.
She was absolutely amazing, just the way she spoke. But what she was talking about was the fact that these men in positions of authority have used that authority and used their positions to abuse women and behave irresponsibly. They need to be made to take responsibility for the things they did. Just because you can do a thing or could do a thing doesn't mean you should. And as an adult person, you should have the ability to check yourself. That's the part of personal responsibility that I think is important.
Yeah, so that people have to first be made to act with empathy and understand that they've done something wrong, and then they have to be, they have to take responsibility for it. So
yeah, it's like
you can't force it, can you? You can't force someone to have empathy if they're a proper psychopath.
These particular, this sort of Me Too, hashtag Me Too, and all this that has come out. It is time for that to change. This just because it was different times. That's not an excuse.
Well, yeah, and now this is now times, and there is a question of, like we touched on, sort of what you're responsible for is part of the culture, and as the culture progresses, things that might have seemed okay in the past now don't. But that doesn't. Is there a statute of limitations on past behaviour? I don't know.
I mean, I think. It depends. I think I don't want this associated particularly with the hashtag Me Too, because I think it's something different. But I think, let's say in my own life, I know that I've said something careless, upset people, offended people, done careless things. I would really hope that I wouldn't do them again. That I've learned enough to not do them again, and I'm sorry that I did them. But so I think as long as there is a point at which, as long as you're understand that thing that you didn't really understand was wrong when you did it, you've learned enough to understand that it was.
So I think there's nothing that sometimes you can't. Sometimes it's enough to be moving in the right direction. Yeah. Even if you can't kind of fix everything.
And there's a difference between a mistake. We all make mistakes, but if they become habitual or becomes part of our normal behaviour,
if we refuse to recognise them as mistakes,
then that is not cool.
If they are deliberate, then you are most certainly unambiguously responsible.
Absolutely. Being drunk is not an excuse, according to Michael.
Okay. Thanks for listening, everyone. If you like the podcast, go to grandpodcast.com, press subscribe. It'll take you to the right place so you don't miss the future ones. And if you want to go back through them, just start from the first one, because it's a bit of a sort of progression through time. Where can people find you, Ivanka?
You can find me at Ivanka on Twitter.
You can find me, michaelforestmusic.com.
Be really nice is if you could go to things like iTunes, Apple Podcasts, all those kind of things. Give us some stars, give us some ratings, tell your friends about us. Don't be shy. We're the ones embarrassing ourselves.
Yeah. It's not you. It's not your.
Not you.
I mean, yes, it's your taste that's in question, but I think you made a good choice.
I mean, you could share it and just say, "Look, I heard this thing. What do you think?" You don't have to say it's amazing. Please listen. Just in case you want to check in first whether they like it. That's cool. We understand that.
Yes, anyway. So, and come and check out our library, grandpodcast.com/library, and because that's got all the links. Everything we talk about is all linked in there in a big mess of thumbnail images. But yeah, so hope you enjoyed that. See you next time. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.